Hey guys, how's it going? Twiggs here, and I'm throwing my hat, well in this case, my beanie, into the ring to join in on this discussion that I've been seeing be brought up several times here lately in the Destiny 2 community. And if you are a member of the Destiny 2 community, then you know most likely what I'm talking about, and that is this gun right here. So, Divinity. It is a gun that I am so familiar with because it is the gun that I have to be the one to equip it during boss DPS phases because usually no one else wants to run it. So, like a good sport, I elect to run it. That's why I usually try to keep it leveled up every season. As you can see, I've already began to level it up. It's at 1573, and it will most likely be 1580 by the end of the season. But a lot of people have been talking about Divinity. People have been voicing criticism or support for the gun, and it's been very polarizing. So, before we jump into this, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell so you can be informed whenever I go live on YouTube or upload new content like this. So, with that being said, let's talk about Divinity. For those of you who live under a rock, Divinity, when it is applied to an enemy, it creates a big blue bubble. And when it creates that big blue bubble, it expands the crit box and applies a debuff that I think is like 30-35%. It's quite a big debuff. And it also stuns overload champions, which that's not the point of the gun. The point of the gun is the big damage bubble and the debuff. But like I said, I know this gun all too well. I am typically the one that ends up running it. But one might be asking, well, what is this dilemma that Divinity, and why is Divinity in a dilemma? Well, I will explain it to you by heading over to Twitter. Mr. Saltagrepo, shout out to him. He is so far, him and his team and his clan are so far three-peat world's first champions when it comes to the last few raids that have come out. They won the world's first for Vault of Glass, Vow of the Disciple, and this last raid, King's Fall. So, big shout out to those guys. That is very impressive. And a big shout out to Saltagrepo. Just strong team, strong players. But besides giving them the shout out, giving the props that they well deserve, Saltagrepo, let's see, a couple days ago actually, put out this thread. And he wanted to discuss a nerf for Divinity. And I'm not going to go through the whole thread, but I will probably read the first few things here. So, hey, I'm not going to start there. Okay. I've been thinking about a way, and I'm beginning to quote Saltagrepo. I've been thinking about a way to nerf Divinity for quite a bit. The gun is basically mandatory for most boss encounters, and it makes aiming a non-factor, which is very unhealthy for the game for multiple reasons, such as removing most of the skill gap during DPS and making precision weapons way too easy to use. forcing high-risk, high-reward weapons such as Whisper the Worm out of the meta, since they simply can't be buffed. Otherwise, they would be S tier due to Div removing the risk aspect. For the longest time, I didn't really ever come up with a viable solution. I don't think removing a debuff would do much. Teams would just apply a debuff by other means and use Div on top of it for ease of crits, which is possibly true. And he suggests reducing the mag size would be insignificant, and it would just make people run special ammo for kind of like how people run Aeons for heavy. So then he finally came up with an idea that would also help preserve the gun's identity. So here we go. We're going to get to this part. What if Divinity kept giving the crit bubble but provided a 0% debuff that overrides any other debuff? So for that example, using Divinity plus Tether resulted in no debuff as long as Div is applied. That would make it so if you decide to use Div, you both sacrifice someone's damage and lose the ability to debuff the target, making it a safe option, but worse compared to what a skilled team could pull off by hitting their shots. This is something that should be easy to implement and blah 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 blah. So his suggestion is make it a 0% debuff, but keep the crit bubble. And I get the idea that he's going for. That way, I mean, the Divinity would keep its identity by producing the big blue bubble. But reducing the debuff to 0 and then negating any other debuff along with it, it just sounds kind of go. I would say his idea would be a little bit over tuning, because nobody, like, he's basically suggesting that, because that would really just kill the gun. That would literally and honestly kill the gun. Because if it's going to negate other debuffs, then nobody's going to want to run it, because, well, I would rather just have it not use Divinity, try to hit my shots, and have a debuff. That would literally kill the gun. His suggestion would kill the gun. I'd rather try to hit my shots with a debuff than not have a debuff but a big blue bubble. So, Saltagrepo, again, big shout out to him. Seems like a really cool dude. Here, let me finish up what he said right here. He's open to the idea of more ideas, and what he basically wants is to make in-game content like day 1 raids and contest raids more interesting, and not feel like it would be mandatory to run Divinity. But let me read his last statement here. Since so many keep saying this, no, difficulty isn't the point. I don't think it's needed, but if that's what it takes, let's reduce bosses' HPs to make up for the nerf, so that casuals wouldn't be affected. The whole point is that Div shouldn't be both the best and easiest option. So, there you go. I think a part of him is wanting to try to take from his point of view, he feels like Divinity is mandatory, and he's basically wanting to shake things up, it looks like. And there's nothing wrong with that. But let's come from my point of view. My point of view is, I think, let me explain my point of view first, or where my perspective is coming from. That actually is what I meant to say, is what is my perspective? My perspective is someone who, let me put some background to this. after Saltagrepo put out that thread on Twitter, of all places, people from both sides of the playing field, that being a more casual gaming audience and a more hardcore-ish to super hardcore-ish elitist perspectives, chimed in. Some people are for the Divinity nerf, and a lot of the casual player base, and some people, I would say casual to hobbyist, are defending Divinity, saying, hey, this gun is necessary to have because it gives a really good debuff, makes it easier to hit the crit spot, and helps out the casual player base because, well, it's really good at applying a crit, it's really good at applying a debuff, making it a tad bit easier to get through the encounter, some kind of boss encounter, and then move on to whatever it is you're doing next. If you're in a raid, dungeon, nightfall, whatever. Whereas the more hardcore player base are saying, no, I think Saltagrepo's onto something. Maybe it should be nerfed because, well, shake up the meta. Make Divinity not so mandatory. And then they have also really good points. And I'm going to get to one of those points. But first, now that I put some background to this and what the whole thing is about Divinity, my point of view is someone who kind of walks the fine line in between both. When I'm not at my day job, I am in front of this screen that I'm talking to you from right now, playing whatever game that I feel like playing, whether it be Destiny 2, Genshin Impact, or whatever. Yes, I have a personal life. And yes, I have a day job. I have to commit time to those things, to the people that I love, and to my job so I can make money to support myself and the people I love. So, do I have a job that requires me to work 40-ish plus hours a week? Yes. So, do I have a lot of time to do really whatever the hell I want? No. Do I wish I did? Hell yeah. But the thing is that I get the casual player base. I get the hardcore player base because I do play games to be challenging. I do want the challenge. I enjoy that. So I get wanting to shake at the meta because you want to try out new stuff, create new builds, create new strategies when it involves DPS settings. So as someone who sees both sides of the playing field and also runs Divinity, who is the one that runs Divinity usually in every DPS setting, I get it. I get both sides. And I will explain one of the things I completely get. Divinity applies a 30-35% debuff. Feel free to hop down in the comments below to correct me. I think it's 30-35%. So that is a really big debuff. And think about all the other things that apply a debuff. Divinity being number one. Other things that create a debuff are weakening grenades that only last like 5 to 10 seconds. The other thing that we know very well that creates a debuff is tether. Tether lasts a fair amount of time, but Divinity can be a lot longer if you know how to shoot Divinity. And to extend Divinity's lifespan, you just tap the fucking shoot button. Not really hard at all. And then bam, you extended how long you can apply Divinity's debuff by a fair amount more time. Which, again, will last longer than Tether, especially Deadfall Tether. The only other things that apply a debuff in this game that I can think of off the top of my head is Tractor Cannon. But Divinity lasts longer than Tractor Cannon because Tractor Cannon is a heavy. So you're going to have a little less ammo to work with. So you got this weapon that applies the same amount of a debuff as Tether and Weakening Grenade. I won't say Weakening Grenades. I don't exactly remember what Weakening Grenades' debuff is. But I'll go with Tether. A super. Tether being a super. And Divinity not only applies the same debuff, but it can last for multiple damage phases. And we're not even going to consider how if you get fortunate and pick up special ammo. So the thing is that you got this really good debuff that lasts forever, almost. We're saying virtually forever. And it's as good as a super, and its ease of use is out of this world. The only thing that's keeping you from this weapon is running the arguably worst raid in the game and adding another 30 minutes to an hour depending on your team and depending on if anyone knows how to do a div run on Garden of Salvation. I mean, that's the only thing keeping you from getting Divinity is running Garden of Salvation and having the extra 30 minutes to an hour on top of how normally long it takes to run Garden of Salvation. That's the only thing keeping you from Divinity. And yes, like I said, Garden is one of the worst raids. This is my opinion. When I say this is my opinion, I only know one person that likes running Garden of Salvation. And if he is watching this video, he knows who he is. Like I said, I only know one person that likes that raid. Everyone else I know hates that raid. And that's the thing. You just got this one awful raid keeping you from Divinity. If you do it, bam, you got one of the best and easiest debuffs in the game to use. So that's the thing, is that, and that's right now the leading argument to people saying, or quite a few people saying and agreeing that Divinity should get nerfed, is that it's an ease of use thing, and it's almost mandatory to run in DPS settings. And this gets to my next point. If you noticed in the last couple raids, there has been a enemy that works as a DPS check. And Caretaker, he was one. That was from Vow of the Disciple. But in the last raid, King's Fall, Warpriest was a big DPS check. And what people are probably not noticing or not seeing clearly is that when Bungie is designing these bosses, they are trying to keep in mind what we have available at the time. What we have that we can use to melt the hell out of the bosses. And one of those things is going to be Divinity. Divinity has been one of the mainstays in a DPS setting for the longest time, ever since it came out. Bungie knows that we have this gun, and they're going to adjust how encounters work, how much health the boss has, with that gun in mind. So if that gun is creating a 30% debuff, they're going to add a little bit more health to the boss to counteract the debuff, to make boss phases more challenging. Another thing that Bungie is probably doing is that, what is the one cool thing that Divinity does? It makes the crit bubble bigger by creating this big blue bubble that everyone can shoot, and it's easy as hell to shoot. When Taniks came out with Deepstone Crypt, Taniks just stayed there. He had this he had a tiny head on top of his giant shank body. And it was a little bit annoying to shoot his head because he was kind of wobbling. But he just stood in one place. But it was really annoying to shoot his head because he wobbled. And his head wasn't that big. So what did Divinity do when you shot Taniks with Divinity? Under his shank body, it created a big blue bubble. A big blue bubble. And we could just shoot it. And bam. There we go. Crit problem solved. Shoot the big blue bubble underneath the shank body. And since he didn't move, it was just easy pickings. So fast forward to Warpriest. Now, when the way Warpriest's damage phase works is that when damage phase stops, he's not stationary. He is moving constantly back and forth. So the Divinity user and everyone else shooting at the Warpriest, trying to shoot the Divinity bubble, are now trying to follow along with the Divinity bubble, and the Divinity user is trying to follow along with Warpriest while he's moving back and forth, making the damage phase a little bit more challenging. A little bit more. That's an example of Bungie working around the knowledge that we obviously have this gun in our possession, and we're going to use it. And so they are tweaking things to damage phase encounters with the idea of that gun in mind. So that's the thing. We gotta think about if Bungie, if they choose to nerf Divinity based on this discussion going on in the community. If they nerfed it, then now things might change a little for the better or worse. In my opinion, I think there is an argument to be had about the ease of use of the debuff. It is a really easy debuff to apply, and it just, think of this. It outperforms a super that's whole point is to debuff, being deadfall tether on hunters. I do think that's a little silly. The debuff lasts longer. It's the same amount of a debuff. Why run deadfall tether if we can just run Divinity? So in my opinion, I think maybe nerfing the debuff if it is 35%, again, feel free to correct me, then maybe nerf it by 10%. Nerf the debuff by 10%. So if the debuff is 35%, it would go down to 25%. That way, it's not matching something like a super, and it counteracts. I mean, if something's going to be easy of use, easy to use, there has to be a trade-off. So that would be my idea, is maybe nerfing the debuff by 10%. I'm not big on Saltagrepo's idea, because if we went with Saltagrepo's idea, it would literally kill the gun. Nobody is going to run Divinity just to make the bubble bigger, but forsake any kind of debuff at all. Like, respect the man, but I'm not behind that idea. I am behind the idea. I'm all right with the idea of nerfing Divinity, but that idea would destroy it. So feel free to hop down in the comments below on what your all's thoughts are on Divinity. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button, and I'll talk to you guys later.